and gentlemen, we're about to go live streaming and we're broadcasting live. We're at the Atlantis Casino and we have very special guests today. We have Geoff Lawerence, was several years with NPRI, which he's written several books like The Piglet and various interesting articles. It's a conservative think tank, the best way I describe it. But he has a new position starting March 1st, and he'll be assistant controller with Ron Connect. If you would, please welcome Jeffrey. He's going to speak in three different segments, be about 10 minutes each, and then 5 minutes for Q&A, and then at the end, you guys can ask questions. Jeffrey, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My new boss sends me with a message, and that is that you are free to make your checks out to Friends of Ron Connect. Now, I was fortunate enough to catch part of your last meeting online thanks to this wonderful technology. And I have to say that my goal today is to perhaps light up just one fewer firework than my friend Michelle Fiore did. Now, as Ray said, I'd like to address you in kind of three different segments tonight about what's going on in the legislature this year. Some of you may know that at the beginning of this year, I started working for the Assembly Republican Caucus as policy director, and I still will continue to have a significant input there and kind of guiding the course of what bills are going to be presented and endorsed by the caucus. My new boss, Ron, is very much in favor of me spending some of my time in that capacity. So I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of the education reform agenda for this session. And then I'll talk to you, secondly, about some components of the governor's plan and his proposals. And thirdly, I'll talk a little bit about labor and collective bargaining issues. And I want to give you a chance in between each of those to ask some questions because I'm not a huge fan of just hearing myself talk all the time. I prefer kind of a dialogue. When it comes to education in Nevada, Nevada does face some rather unique challenges, and I'm sure you've all heard the statistics. So we have the lowest high school graduation rate in the country, usually toward the bottom in standardized testing. We're not at the bottom, but we're usually in the bottom 10. And that is a result of a combination of factors. We do have some unique challenges here in that we have a high proportion of students who do not speak English well. We have a high transiency rate. In fact, Clark County has the highest transiency rate of any school district in the country. We also have a lot of students who come from single-parent homes and come from low-income households. That's usually measured by which students are eligible for free and reduced-price lunches in schools, which is kind of a standard federal level that's set across the board. And Nevada ranks very highly in that. More than half of our students are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. So that makes educating students in Nevada, particularly in the urban centers of Nevada, very difficult. However, there are some states that have comparable statistics and seem to do a better job than we do. I think that Arizona is the best comparison to Nevada. Because they have roughly the same proportions of each of those categories. In fact, they have more students who do not speak English well. They have more students who are come from low-income households. And yet they seem to be doing better with less money. Nevada spends about $10,000 roughly per student in its K-12 education system on average. That's according to the Federal Education Department. Arizona spends about $9,100, so about $900 less per student. They have better graduation rates. They have higher test scores. So what is it that Arizona is doing that we are not? Well, the answer is that Arizona was one of the first and most aggressive states that jumped up on board an aggressive reform agenda. For instance, Arizona has long held the most aggressive charter school law in the country. 12% of K-12 students in Arizona attend a charter school as opposed to a traditional public school. For those who don't know, a charter school is a school of choice, but it is a regular public school. They don't charge any tuition. It's just managed by a private board, and they can hire teachers who aren't necessarily don't necessarily go through the same certification requirements as standard school teacher. They're also not subject to the same structured salary schedule. They're free to employ, alternatively certified teachers, pay people based on what they think they, bring to the table. So it's more, a little bit more market based. 12% of students in Arizona are in charter schools. That's huge. That's about 3 times the nationwide average. Nationwide is about 4%. In Nevada, we're slightly less than that. Nevada's charter school law was first passed in 1997 as a way, and it was passed as a way to kill support for private school choice, for vouchers. But even that law put a statewide cap on the number of charter schools that we could have. It was 23, I think. And that was subsequently relaxed. And then up until the 2011 session, we had kind of overhaul of charter school legislation. And that will continue into this session, I think. But Arizona jumped on this very early. They also have they've been the most aggressive state in pushing private school choice. They have about 3 different mechanisms, in fact. You can, in Arizona, first they created a voucher system. They had some problems with that because the state teacher union sued and wound up getting that overturned. But they came back and installed a tuition tax credit scholarship program where if a business or an individual in Arizona can donate money to a nonprofit whose only job is to make scholarships for qualified students, so they can attend private schools of their choice. And the scholarship amount is, it's kind of capped at what the state spends on a regular student in public schools, generally. Any student is eligible to receive one if they come from a household that's up to 300% of the federal poverty level. That actually includes a majority of students in Arizona. It would likewise include a majority of students in Nevada. And that's one of the key planks of the reform agenda that's going to come out of this session, I think. That's one of the things that the governor asked for in his State of the State address, and definitely high up on in both chambers. I think it's high up on their priority list. It's the bill that would create that is actually being heard tomorrow in the Assembly Education Committee. So you have time to go down to Carson City and testify. I'm sure the more support we can have on that bill, the better, because it will create private school choice in a mechanism very similar to a voucher program. We kind of have the same constitutional issue here that they had in Arizona, where we have something called a Blaine Amendment that prohibits any public funds from going to a religious institution. Well, that's been interpreted to mean in some states that you can't give money to if parents enroll their students in a private school, at least some of them are likely to choose a parochial school, like a Catholic school or Lutheran school or something like that. And that has been the grounds to challenge voucher programs. But an opportunity scholarship of this mechanism is basically it functions very similar to a voucher. It just gets around that legal issue. In Arizona, another thing they have is something they created very recently in 2011. Is called an educational savings account. And what that is the state, if you want to participate in this program, the state will deposit money into a private account on behalf of your child, and you can use that money for a wide array of educational purposes. It can either go to private school tuition and go to transportation costs. You can buy private tutoring. You can buy textbooks or online resources. And if you don't use all the money in the account by the end of the year, guess what? You get to keep it, and you can later use it to pay college tuition. So that was a really exciting program they created in Arizona. And we also have a bill that would do that in legislature this year. That's on the Senate side, being sponsored by Scott Hammond. So, I think if we're going to talk about what education can be and should be in Nevada, Arizona really is the model because, they're another Western state. or adjacent to us. It spends less money than us, and still does better facing the same or similar challenges. Now, a lot of people like to compare Nevada to Utah or Idaho, for instance, because those states spend a lot less than Nevada does. In Utah, they spend about $2,500 less per pupil. And they have, actually they spend less than any state in the country, and they have pretty good test scores, and usually in the top 20. But the demographics in Utah are far different than they are here. You have most students there coming from middle income households, 2-parent households. They don't have the English language learner issue to the same extent that we do. And so that's why I think that Arizona really is the best comparison, and there is a lot to learn from what they've done. And that includes both charter schools and private school choice, but it also includes things like using technology better to help students learn. It's really kind of funny that only in 2 sectors of the American economy does technology ever lead to higher costs. It's either in government or in healthcare, right? Everywhere else, the whole purpose of technology is to make us more efficient. Well, that should also be the case in education. In fact, a lot of states have used technology to create virtual classrooms, entire virtual schools. And in Nevada, we have a lot of virtual charter schools that are completely online. And that actually winds up being very beneficial, especially for students in rural areas. So, if you're raising a family in Lovelock or in Battle Mountain, most likely it's going to be hard to recruit high-quality teachers to those areas. So having a good virtual school allows those students to access some of the best teaching talent in the world without going to a traditional brick-and-mortar facility. It's also a lot less costly to run a virtual school because you don't have those facilities costs and maintenance costs. You don't have transportation costs. And studies nationwide, it's a kind of a new phenomena that we've used the internet for schooling. But studies nationwide have started to show that students are actually performing much better when they're enrolled in virtual schools, especially students who have at-risk conditions, students who come from low-income households or single-parent households. Just a second. Part of the reason for that is that these students. Studies show that students enrolled in an online course spend more time on task. So if you have an hour-long class, they're actually focused as opposed to you having 30 kids in a classroom distracting each other and not actually focusing on what they're supposed to be doing. So online schooling can be very effective. And some states have actually required students to take online courses as a requisite for graduation. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions about the education reform agenda we'll be facing this session. What's that? Oh, sorry. I'm told I need to fill the airwaves for a second. It's like we have a question coming. Right. I can repeat it. So the question was, how many students in Nevada are not legal residents, so are illegal aliens? The answer is that's almost impossible to know because there's really no data source that keeps track of it. If a student's enrolled in Clark County, for instance, they get recorded as an enrollment, and that I wouldn't even know how to answer that.
Is there any other questions?
Wonderful.
Yeah, I have a little sort of follow-up on what you said, because I'm very much a Republican because I believe in smaller government. And it's such a fallacy when they say the cost of education should be going up. We've got some programs we've introduced that are really bring down the cost because it's online, and the Republican Party actually bought the training. That said, right now, once you're set up, this is free. We're recording this. Any lesson can be recorded. And to buy the materials to set it is about $400, and it's free. So any classroom, anybody could be recorded. Proof that it's gone way down the cost of education.
Right. I think it's worth noting that Nevada spending both in Nevada and nationwide has really skyrocketed in the past couple of decades. Here we spend roughly 3 times on an inflation-adjusted basis per pupil what we did 50 years ago. And nationwide, I think it's even gone up a little faster than it has in Nevada. So that is a good point to make, because we used to get better high school graduates for 1/3 of the cost than we do today. And probably the most exciting thing that's happened in education in the last couple of years is the emergence of Khan Academy, which has some of the best lectures in little 5-minute segments that you can find anywhere in the world, and any student in the world can watch that for free. So, you know, the notion that we have to pay a lot more to get better results is really misguided, I think.
I happen to be sitting in the budget hearings for the Department of Agriculture, which happens to run the food programs for the low income and children. So it's low pay or no pay. And the First Lady was there asking for $1 million+ to add breakfast in the classrooms for all children, because currently only 21% of the 100% that are eligible to use the program are using it. And her answer was, it's the stigma attached to being, you know, low income or getting free breakfast. The kids didn't want to do it. So let's just offer it to all the children and put it in the classroom in the morning. I just think that's such a waste of not only monetary resources, but when are we going to start holding parents responsible for raising their own children?
That's a great question. In fact, I don't know how here we're in school when there was a free breakfast program, but I was, and I don't recall there being much of a stigma. I think that what's really happening is that a lot of parents just want to feed their kids on their own and want to do that at home before they take them to school. So it may be that even if a student's eligible, that you're never going to have 100% participation among eligible students because there are families out there who just want to spend family time.
Mr. Lawerence, you've spoken of a number of all government programs, from tuition assistance to scholarships, and your republicanism. How does all that comport with the Republican ideal of getting a smaller government and getting government out of education? None of this I've heard is in line with those ideals. Would you address that, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, what I'm talking about, what I think is the most exciting part of our reform agenda is the Opportunity Scholarship model, which is a voucher type of mechanism where you have the state just financing education, not providing education. We have a food stamp program, for instance, which is basically kind of a voucher where the state doesn't actually run commissaries. They just give people money to go out and purchase whatever groceries they need. We have Safe Martin, Rayleigh's, et cetera. There's no reason that schools can't be delivered in the same way. And in fact, it can be done more efficiently. Nationwide, 80% of private schools charge tuition of less than $10,000, whereas we spend $10,000 on average in public schools. So it is cheaper to educate a child privately.
What % of the budget, the education budget, is actually spent on teaching?
That's a great question. This came up during a 2011 legislative session. Senator Roberson brought a bill that would have required schools to spend at least 65% of their money in the classroom. We weren't sure what the actual number was before that came up, but LCB did some research and said that we're currently spending about 59% of education spending in the classroom. The rest of it goes to administration. Now that's a huge overhead cost. And Clark County, to be honest, is the biggest problem because they have such a huge bureaucracy there. And when Clark County was consolidated from 13 different districts many decades ago under the guise that they would realize some economies of scale and be able to reduce their overhead costs. Well, what happened in reality is that they kept all the existing bureaucracies from the old school districts and then just added a new one on top. And so there's actually a lot of research nationwide that shows that the larger a school district gets, the more its overhead grows as well. So.
You got it now? Okay, go ahead.
We'll have Pat talk to you after the meeting. Right now, we'll go to the next segment. Well, maybe won't be as long, and we'll have questions. You can ask him questions. Next
All right.
segment.
Okay, so and this kind of is related to education as well, but the governor's proposal for his new budget is that he's included a lot of new categorical spending items in education, nearly $500 million worth, and these include things like full-day kindergarten, increased spending on gifted and talented students, a tech program by which he wants to put a portable electronic device in the hands of every student, something like an iPad. Also, he wants to double the size of the Zoom Schools program, which is his English language learners initiative from last session. It's currently at $50 million. He wants to double it to $100 million. He wants to create a new concept, which is called a victory school, which is he wants to take some of the lowest performing schools in the state and dump a lot more money into them, about $25 million over the next 2 years. Also wants to create a Read by 3 program that has about a $30 million price tag attached to it. Now, there are, within each of these spending items, there are some merits. Read by 3, for instance, if you don't read by the end of 3rd grade, you have almost zero probability of graduating from high school. However, that doesn't mean that it has to cost $30 million because there's a way to do Read by 3 that costs nothing, at least in the short term, and that's that you end the practice of social promotion and you just force that kid to repeat the 3rd grade until they are literate. Because up to the 3rd grade, you're basically learning to read. After that point, you are reading to learn. So you have to be literate by the time you get out of 3rd grade. The reason the governor has a price tag attached to it is because he doesn't want a lot of students having to repeat. He wants to dedicate some private literacy instructors and tutors and things to students that are having challenges so that they can move on to 4th grade in time without needing remedial instruction or another year in 3rd grade. With many of these spending items, there are reasons that they sound good, but it may not be that they are justified by the price tag. Because there are existing areas of spending on education that have shown to be very ineffective in Nevada. And I think at the top of that list is our categorical spending item for class size reduction. We created this in 1991 with the idea that if you put fewer students in front of a teacher, they can spend more one-on-one time with each student, and that would help them learn. That was a very noble goal. However, in the time since, state tests have shown that the students in the larger classes have actually done better than the students in the smaller classes. And that's because nationwide research shows that the most impactful variable on student performance is the quality of the teacher. If you have a very high quality teacher, doesn't matter how many students you put in front of them, those students will do very well. But if you have this class size mandate that forces you to put no more than 17 or 18 kids in each classroom, that means you have to go out and hire a bunch of new teachers who are inexperienced and may not be that talented. So now you've got students in front of those teachers who may be worse off than if they had been in a larger classroom. Also, students tend to learn from each other sometimes. So a larger class isn't necessarily always a bad idea. So that's a $350 million price tag in our 2-year budget that could be reallocated to some of these priority areas that the governor's talking about. And to be honest, there is merit to some of his ideas, and I think they are better than some existing spending. But he has proposed this with the idea that we would also need new revenue in order to support that. And his revenue mechanism is to create a modified version of a gross receipts tax. And most closely, it's comparable to Washington State's business and occupation tax because the rate differs by industry based on gross receipts, not profitability, by the way. So even if you're losing money, you would you could face a new tax burden under this proposal. So that gives it the kind of the same drawbacks as the margin tax that was just on the ballot and defeated 4-1. So I think that's probably going to be a hard sell for him in the legislature, because the most popular thing on the ballot last election was opposition to the margin tax. If that had not been there to draw Republican voters out, it might be the case that the assembly wouldn't even be Republican. So it's hard to go out and ask for Republican votes in the legislature to support a tax that looks very similar to that. So I expect out of the governor's proposal, I think that he probably will get some of his education ideas, but that the revenue side of the equation will look a lot different than what he's proposed. Now, he also has proposed some really significant education reforms that don't necessarily have a big price tag attached to them. And that is both the opportunity scholarship mechanism, which should actually save money because it is cheaper to educate a student in private school, but also what he calls an achievement school district. And this is an idea that was taken from both Louisiana and Tennessee, where they have these in place. And what an achievement school district is a statewide school district that takes on some of the lowest performing schools in the state. Takes, if they're in, let's say they're in North Las Vegas or in Sparks, takes them out of the Clark County and Washoe County School District, puts them into the special district under direct supervision of the state education department. And their entire mission is to transform those schools into successful charter schools. And put a charter school board in charge of it. And this has been a tremendous success in both Louisiana and in Tennessee. In fact, almost all public schools in New Orleans now are charter schools because of the way they call it a recovery school district, but because of the way they've transformed the schools there. And the Tennessee mechanism has worked equally well in places like Memphis. So this is actually a really exciting, kind of turnaround mechanism that doesn't have a huge dollar component or a huge price tag attached to it, because we're still spending roughly the same amount to run the school while it's under state supervision, and then it actually gets cheaper usually once a charter school takes over. I think there's a lot to be excited about, and probably also some to be weary about out of the governor's proposals. With that, I'm take some more questions, I suppose.
All right, now take it up for questions. Pat, I think you asked a question. So you're first on. I know Bill will be upset I'm not on this on previously. That's all right.
Pat Shannon, Jeff. These charter school that they're working on for the statewide school district.
Mm-hmm.
How does the property tax work in that case? The property tax comes out of the county. How does it get moved around?
Right. That's a great question. And this is an issue on a separate bill, actually, because charter schools are currently not entitled to the same construction and capital funds that a regular district-run school is, because all property taxes that are dedicated for capital construction go straight to the school district. There is a bill that would equalize that funding this session, so the charter schools would get an equitable share based on the existing pool of revenues there. But in this particular case, it's actually not a big concern because we're talking about schools that are already constructed. And they are currently run by districts already. So it's only the maintenance costs of those facilities that become relevant at that point. And with our kind of companion bill, which is the Charter School Equalization Bill, we'll be able to cover that as well.
Having full-time kindergarten sounds like a wonderful idea, but as they have found out with the Head Start programs, everything that was gained in those Head Start programs and full-day kindergarten is lost when those children go into first grade, because then they are held back by the students that don't know how to read. And I've just heard an appalling thing that you're telling me that you're hoping to have readers by the end of third grade, whereas charter school, a private school in Las Vegas, looks at their children and says, no child enters first grade who cannot read. Mm. So you have two very, very different things going on here. Until we hold our students to standards across the board and make those standards stick, you're going to fail. You have to hold back the students that do not read. You
Right.
have to let our students excel instead of being always taught to the lowest denominator in the class.
Yeah, I agree. Reading by 3 is not very ambitious. But what's even more appalling is that we're not meeting even that standard. So starting with read by 3 is, like I said, that's the starting point. Hopefully we get to the point where that's no longer even a concern. When it comes to full day kindergarten, this was a program that was created back in the mid 2000s when there was a lot of money in state general fund. And we started to dedicate $50 million a budget cycle to put full day K in just the highest poverty schools in the state. Since then, last session, Governor Sandoval expanded that to include more schools and went up to 85 million for the budget cycle. For the 2-year budget cycle. This year, he wants to put full day K in every school. And as you mentioned, nationwide research is very similar to Head Start, is that those gains those students do make gains. They're just temporary, and they tend to peter out by the end of about 3rd grade. You can't tell a difference between a child who went to half day K versus full day K. And that's really the comparison, by the way. If we're talking about not putting a child in full day K, it's not saying that we're not going to have them in kindergarten altogether. The real comparison is full day K versus half day K. And students in half day K tend to do just as well by the time they get into later grades and graduating high school and going to college, et cetera. And by the way, the cost is about half as much because a half day K class, well, you can have a single teacher cover 2 classes and a single classroom cover those 2 classes. Whereas with full day K, you have to now double your facilities costs as well as your personnel costs.
Mr. Lawerence, thank you. You have eloquently and effectively decoupled the correlation between dollars spent and graduation rates. Now, would you please give us a metric on what does work? And also, please stop disparaging the 3rd grade. I love the 3rd grade. I spent 15 years there. I loved it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, the middle of last year when I was still with NPRI, I wrote a paper called 33 Ways to Improve Nevada Education Without Spending More. And I encourage you to go look that up because it covers a lot of very simple fixes that are based on the empirical and academic research out there as to what leads students to do better in school. I'll give you just one example is that nationwide research shows that schools that start later than 8 a.m., the students across the board, whether they're from 2-parent households, whether they're from a single parent or they're poor or they're Hispanic, they always perform better when the school starts after 8 a.m. That's a pretty simple change. That's just starting a little bit later in the day, getting out a little bit later in the day, because the students are more likely to have gotten 8 hours of sleep. They're better prepared when they get to school. Actually, you have tangential benefit of there are fewer vehicular accidents at high schools when they start after 8 a.m. So, that's just one example, but there's kind of a whole basket of things that we could do in that paper.
Mr. Lawerence, I have 2 questions or 2 statements. Number 1 is we're beating up the 3rd grade. And Tom would like to matriculate to the 4th. But if we wait until the 3rd grade, currently we have an auger system. Children get in K or first, and they get pushed out at 12. So what it sounds like is we're shortening that auger to the 3rd grade. And if we don't stop those who are not achieving the 1st grade level or the 2nd grade level until they get to the 3rd grade, and then we put a tremendous emphasis, and it becomes very negative for them. So my thought is if we were to stop them at the 1st and then have them come back for another 1st and so forth, rather than waiting to the 3rd. Do you have a comment on that? Social, yeah, but your mic for some reason isn't working. I don't know if that means danger or you're on. And the other one, Jeff, if you would, is that we have this. Nope. The mic tech is here.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think social motion is detrimental at every grade. Of course, you said that the auger used to be 12th grade that we push students out. In fact, I think in a lot of cases it's lower than that effectively because we only have 60% of students graduating from high school. So most students, because they've fallen behind earlier on, they get bored in class or whatever, they realize that they're not going to continue and they wind up dropping out earlier on.
Or social and cultural pressures make them go take a job or do something else. But we keep talking about this problem with ESL or ELL, and we keep changing the terminology every year to 2 years so it sounds new and wonderful. But if we have students come in, regardless of what language is their native language, if we would put them in an immersion course in English for the entire year, which means summer school as well, by the time they graduated from that, parallel in grade level, time they graduated from that, they'd be very proficient in English and would have a side effect of bringing English into the home. Teachers told me that I was trying to take their jobs away, when in effect, doing that would give more jobs.
Yeah, that's arguable. If you're going to talk about a full year of immersion, most likely then that student would, say they're at the age to go into first grade, they go into the full year of immersion. Maybe the next year they go into traditional first grade, or you have some type of catch-up mechanism.
Second, because I would like to see them stay up. With, or we have a lot of students come in the 4th, 5th, 6th, sometimes the 9th grade, and it would do them well to have that year of immersion across, particularly in the military, where you have 6 months immersion to learn a language, and that's it. You're into that language 24 hours a day. But since the students wouldn't be, that would require probably a year of immersion, regardless of what grade they're in.
Right.
But be able to parallel that grade level so that when they finish that year, they would matriculate with the other people at that same level.
Yeah, I think the ELL question is a unique challenge. But as I mentioned, Arizona deals with it much better than we do. And almost all of those students attend charter schools that are specialized for ELL in Arizona.
It just seems that the school district is not interested necessarily in the progression of the student in English as much as they are having those classes available.
Well, yeah, there's a revenue stream attached to any student that's got a special condition with them.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
Tabor will keep you there forever. He talks more than I do. Herb?
No,
Frank?
that's not true.
Okay. Frank wanted to ask a question, then Herb.
Okay. I've done some research on the internet, which I'd like you to make a comment on. There's a lot of controversy about read by 3, social promotion versus holding them back. And I looked at and read the entire content of 4 or 5 studies. One in which the content was dictated by Clinton, and the other 4 said you get essentially no benefit from holding students back. They gain a little bit for the next year or 2, but after that, you get no benefit from holding them back. If you promote them, then they're SOL. And so my hypothesis, and I assume this is what Sandoval is going after, is it's really critical to make sure that those do everything possible to make those students so they can read by 3. And that's far better from my perspective than holding them back or social promotion.
Right. Yeah, and as I said, I think there's an argument to be made in favor of many of his proposed new categorical spending items. I think that, some students do catch up if they're promoted socially, but there are certain benchmarks that a student has to meet in order to succeed later on, and being literate by the time they finish 3rd grade is definitely one of those. The chance of graduating high school if you're not literate by 3rd grade is something like 2%, so not very good at all.
Yes, my turn.
I would like to refute that
Thank you.
comment. My experience, and it's just very recent, a child was held back in kindergarten So when he got to first grade, he had already been in kindergarten twice, and he could not read. And he just blossomed. He loved it, and he did really, really well. And I have an idea that he moved on automatically to second grade, and he was no worse off. And it was just an amazing experience. And I have never, ever met anybody who flunked kindergarten.
Right. Yeah, I'll just briefly say that when researchers look at these questions about academic achievement and what factors matter, they're looking at statistics, and the statistics tell you the overall trend. But we're not talking about just numbers; we're talking about people, children, and there's always going to be outliers and exceptions. And some students are going to excel regardless of the challenges that are put in front of them, and other students are going to fail regardless of the benefits that they have. So yeah, I don't want to oversimplify that at all.
Herb had a question. This will be the last question on this subject.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm working life in the Marine Corps. We got recruits who could not read. And one of the solutions that we found was we sent them to the eye doctor and got them glasses, and they could see. And then it was just like magic. In a couple of weeks, they were reading 5th grade, and then by the time we got them out of boot camp, they could read. So that's something that early on, if a child starts to have problems, we're adults and immediately we blame the child. Well, that's humbug. It may not be the child's fault. It may just be something as simple as get a pair of glasses. I mean, I found out I couldn't hit a target at 500 yards. And the Marine Corps made me get glasses. And then I've qualified as an expert with that M1 rifle as oftentimes as I shot it. It was just simple as being. And I think human nature requires a guy who can't see good to adjust, to make adjustments. And so he can get by without glasses. And parents and teachers need to recognize that early on. That would solve a lot of problems. And if you have a friend who has a problem, get his eyes examined. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Good comments. I want to advance a little bit before we go to the last subject. And I know some people have to leave at 1 o'clock, but we have it open. He'll stay, answer questions. And the next subject is collective bargaining, to have questions. But before we do that, I'll have Eugene pick a ticket there's $43 in the 50-50. You have to split it with me, though.
Who needs glasses?
4705-717. It's probably my number. Don't bother looking, guys.
Say it again.
You better say it for me.
I don't have my glasses.
No. 4705-717.
Nobody? Somebody left early?
4705-717.
Nobody's responding. Pick another ticket, you think.
Okay. All right.
4705-641. Do I hear bingo? Yes, sir. 4-1.
He won again. I have never seen anybody that won at 3 different meetings and over the last year and a half. And it's always Greg, you know. I think he bribed somebody. Anyway, let's go on to the next and last subject, which is collective bargaining. And then if you look on the back of your agendas, our next meeting is on the 17th, a dinner meeting, and we have a heck of a lineup. His new boss, Ron Connect, will be here. Dan Schwartz. They're both a little controversial, but we like that. about the alternate tax and investment. It'll be a great meeting. It opens up at 5:30. Geoff, now go on to collective bargaining.
Okay. If you were wondering if anything could be more controversial than education, I think we found it. Nevada's first collective bargaining statute actually was passed in 1965, and I'll bet very few of you can guess what it did, because it actually prohibited collective bargaining with any government employee group across the state. That law was reversed 4 years later, in 1969, after the Clark County Teacher Union picketed the Las Vegas Strip to the point that they completely shut down commerce along the Strip, and the Strip casino owners asked the legislature and Governor Paul Laxalt at the time to give them whatever they wanted just to get them off the streets. And that's when the Hatch Act was passed, the Local Government Employee Management Relations Act, that creates mandatory or compulsory collective bargaining with any employee group that represents at least 50% of the employees and that are assigned to that group. Now, a kind of a lasting legacy of the original law is that this only applied to local government. So state employees are still prohibited from collective bargaining due to the 1965 law. So this is really a phenomena at the local level, and it's pretty easy to see what the impact of unions is, both in fiscal terms and dollar terms, as well as in political terms, because unions nationwide, public sector unions, have been some of the largest contributors to political campaigns, particularly for local office. If you look at nationwide statistics, the most prominent donor over the last 25 years to electoral politics has been the nation's largest teacher union, National Education Association. Number two is AFSCME. So public sector unions are some of the most prominent players, and they have the ability to really dictate who gets elected to a lot of local boards, both through not just donations, but the fact that they can contribute a lot of manpower for get out the vote activities and things like that. Union endorsement winds up being a really significant factor because through the discipline of their own membership, most public sector unions are able to kind of very effectively vote as a block. In fact, there was a study done at Stanford a couple of years ago that looked at school board elections across the state of California over the past decade, and they showed that school teachers who lived in their districts were about 7 times more likely than the average voter to vote in a school district election. And because school districts employ so many people, the turnout difference alone was enough to control the outcome of every election. Organized groups of public employees who organize themselves as unions can be very impactful at getting people elected who will kind of kowtow to the union interests. And that may not be the interest of the taxpayer. It may not be, in case of teachers, it may not be the interest of children. And I think that's definitely been the case here in Nevada as in other states. And we've seen that also drive up the cost of government substantially without having any kind of consequential improvements in public services. In fact, if you look at basically any metric of how well the government is performing, whether it's crime rates for police or the student achievement in the case of education, that there's really no case to be made that our public services have gotten better in the past 4 or 5 decades. But they have gotten a lot more expensive. And that's why collective bargaining reform is kind of at the top of the agenda, at least on the Assembly Republican side this session, because I think that we're going to be looking at reforms that make unions both accountable to their own membership as well as to the taxpayers that they serve. One of the big problems with unions is that they profess to be democratic institutions, but in all of the Clark County School District, which employs about 37,000 people, there are 3 teachers who voted in the union organization election that occurred back in the 1970s. So the bulk of public employees today never had a chance to vote on their own union because those elections occurred decades ago before they ever even entered the workforce. And one of the only states that has compulsory bargaining that has changed that dynamic is what Wisconsin did a few years ago, requiring unions to hold a vote to their own membership every year. I don't know for sure if that will happen here, but I think something similar to that gives employees and union members themselves a vote at least occasionally would go a long way to making unions a lot more accountable and how they're using their dollars. Another thing that I know that we're going to be pushing in the assembly is requiring unions to get the explicit permission of every employee before they can withhold dues and use those dues for political purposes. Many employees feel some type of loyalty to the union, and so they pay their dues, but it doesn't mean they like how their dues are being used. If you look at either a teacher union or AFSCME, upwards of 95% of their contributions to political candidates are all to Democrats. That doesn't mean that 95% of school teachers or city or county workers are Democrats. In fact, I think that's very unlikely to be the case at all. But they have very little choice in how the money is being used because it's the union bosses who determine that. Another change that we'll be pushing for restrict the use of leave time to allow unions to do all of their union work on the public dime. In most collective bargaining agreements across the state, whether it's in Washoe County, Clark County, or anywhere else, there's a provision that allows any recognized union rep to do up to 40 or 50 hours of service a week on behalf of the union while getting paid by the city or the county. Well, if the union's working against the taxpayers or the representatives of that jurisdiction, it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to foot the bill for their own opposition. So these are private organizations, even though they represent public employees. They themselves are private organizations, and we have public employees in the state who subscribe to National Geographic, but we don't pay the staff in the National Geographic to print the magazines. We don't automatically deduct their membership fees from their paycheck. So I think those two changes will significantly alter the dynamic within the unions themselves. Now, at the taxpayer level, I think additional protections are also needed. And I think that starts with making collective bargaining not mandatory, but optional by local governing boards. If you live in a jurisdiction, a city or a county where collective bargaining with public employees is highly valued by the populace, you should be allowed to have it. And you should be allowed to express that desire through your choice of elected official. But if you live in Lincoln County, where collective bargaining with public employees probably isn't that high in the priority list of most voters, you should be able to elect people to take control of their own budget without being constrained by union contracts. A lot of times we see people in the state who campaign for city or county office on a platform of fiscal reform, only to get elected and find out that they have no control over 90% of their budget because it's all tied up in union contracts. If we're going to be a democratic republic, that means that the elected representatives need to have a control over their own personnel costs, as well as other types of operating costs and capital costs and so forth. And you know what? If they're unwilling to pay the wages that attract quality employees, well, the voters will express their displeasure with that too. So I don't believe that they're in a competitive, dynamic marketplace, that there is any capacity for employees to be railroaded by their public employers because they do bid against each other in order to attract the best talent. So I think all of these things are going to be very high on the agenda for this session, and it's going to be the source of a lot of controversy, I'm sure you will hear. Also related to collective bargaining is the issue of pension costs, because pension costs in the state have been growing exponentially over the past 15 years. The we have an unfunded liability in our public employee pension system, about $12 billion. Every time that goes up, because they kind of have some unrealistic expectations that, or assumptions that cause their unfunded amount to go up from year to year. And every year that happens, the actuaries come back and say, well, because the unfunded amount is going up so much, now every city and county for the next year has to contribute a higher percentage of their payroll in the form of pension contributions to help pay down that debt. Just to illustrate this point, back in 2000, every public employer in the state was supposed to contribute 18% of payroll to cover their pension costs. This year, that will go up to 28%. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that could be going into schools. We're talking about thousands of teachers. It could fund the entire, the governor's entire spending proposal. But instead, we're using it to pay down pension debt because the PERS system uses some really unrealistic assumptions. But B, at the local level, a lot of bargaining units have gotten the employer to cover the entire cost, whereas it's supposed to be shared 50-50. If we have a 28% contribution, it's supposed to be 14% from the employer, 14% from the employee, and that is how it works for state workers. But at the local level, a lot of times it's 100% from the employer, and that becomes very difficult to manage, very difficult to run a city or a county or school district when you've got that much overhead tied up in your pension costs. And by the way, that contribution is the first thing that is paid. Before you pay wages, before you're paying regular operating costs for materials, school books for school districts, that really hamstrings people. So I think collective bargaining reform and pension reform go hand in hand, and we cannot turn the fiscal ship of the state around without having both of them. So I think that's going to be kind of a condition before any other, any type of reform package, any type of revenue package or any other proposal is met this session. We'll have to take those issues on. With that, I'll take some questions.
I'm going to have people come up with questions right now on any of the subjects. Now it's collective bargaining, but we know some of you have to leave. However, it's open. I don't have a mic. Go ahead.
Right here. Okay. You mentioned the assembly is working on this, and I heard you come up with all kinds of adaptations of the law to change this, modify that. Why don't they just eliminate the ability or the right of local government employees to organize and bargain collectively and just end it right there?
So this, I don't know if this sounds extreme to anyone, but this does exist in some states. North Carolina and Virginia, for instance, but Democratic legislatures and Democratic governors in both states passed those types of prohibitions for some employee classes in other states. Georgia, for instance, Tennessee for most employee classes. That's also true. And here that's true for state employees. I think that philosophically, I don't have an argument against that. But there is a political dynamic here where I think that's just going to be difficult to get through all three, both chambers of the legislature and the governor's mansion.
Thanks, Jeff. It's been a great presentation. I think the discount rate or the rate of return assumption for the PERS is unrealistically high, which means that the liability is even worse than the official number.
That's right. The $12 billion is probably understated because there's an inverse relationship between that discount rate. 8% rate of return used to be realistic in the 1980s when that was kind of set because we were getting double-digit returns from year to year. But now with the federal funds rate is around zero, and so the real return that you can get is really in single digits and less than 8%. In fact, over the past 15 years, I think we've only exceeded that 8% twice. So that becomes a huge problem. In fact, other states around the country are now lowering that discount rate. California, the right-wing haven, just lowered theirs to 7.25. So I think that's if it's going to happen in California, it definitely should happen here in Nevada too.
Next question.
You stated, and most of us know, that many times the politicians have been put into office by these unions. Mm-hmm. Now at the bargaining table, You have the politician and you have the unions. There's no bargaining going on there. There's no negotiation. And these are always closed sessions. Why don't we open up this session when you're negotiating with the union and actually have business people there instead of those politicians? I think you'll see a big difference when someone's sitting there going, I'm paying the bill. This isn't realistic. You haven't bought me. Now let's negotiate.
Yeah, if the politician is dependent on union support to get elected, then I think collusion might be a better description than bargaining. But that's definitely a key element as well. And there is a bill that would subject most aspects of collective bargaining to both open meetings and public records laws. And Jim Wheeler's carrying that bill.
I'm still trying to figure out how to ask this question because I guess I'm trying to see this issue regarding pension reform as possibly a contract issue, because this has kind of been coming up in numerous states regarding, pension obligations and pension liabilities. And typically, I've seen a lot of states, a lot of municipalities' way out is declaring bankruptcy. Not so much in the fact that you're fiscally insolvent, but to try to break the contract so those liabilities don't have to be paid. And the case could have been made 4 or 5 years ago in Nevada because technically we were kind of fiscally insolvent due to the recession. But based upon what will likely happen in May with the economic forum, we'll probably be in the black, for lack of a better word, presuming the budget as we have it from the last session goes forward. Has the caucus, but have you, in terms of thinking things out, in terms of legislation, prepared the possibility that pretty much every public union might take you guys to court in the case of trying to renegotiate those pension liabilities? And how much money will it cost the state as a whole to go to court, possibly, if that does occur?
Right. That's a really good question. And we've been trying to craft legislation with those factors in mind because in Colorado a couple of years ago, they did pass pension reform, and it was ultimately overturned by the state Supreme Court because they claimed it was a violation of contract and property rights on behalf of those public employees. And in areas where you've seen bankruptcies happen and cities were trying to get out of some of these pension obligations, it's pretty much all been municipalities. California, Detroit, for instance. States don't really declare bankruptcy and go through that process. One of the challenges here is that we have no state municipal bankruptcy statute, so that's not an option. North Las Vegas is functionally insolvent and should go through a bankruptcy process, actually, but there's no mechanism for them to do that here. So I think that passing municipal bankruptcy statute might be one mechanism to allow people to try and renegotiate those contracts. But the way that we're looking at doing it is to just change the system for in 2 ways. One, for new employees coming in. That they would all go into a hybrid system that is partially a defined benefit, but also partially defined contribution. And the reason we want to keep a defined benefit linked to that is because our public employees don't participate in Social Security, so it gives them a little more certainty in that regard, and then also have the DC component, but also to allow existing employees to opt in to the new program. It's not compulsory, but they can make that option one time. If they decide to go into the new hybrid system, then they would never be able to go back afterwards. And that winds up actually being a better deal for a lot of employees if they don't plan on spending 30 years in the same job. Most public employees nationwide are spending about 6 to 7 years in the job, and that makes a defined contribution plan look a lot more desirable nowadays because it is portable from job to job.
Jeff, quick question. In this fine state, there's got to be one city council who would actually stand up against a public employee union. Let's say there's a city council who has the firefighters and they will not agree in closed session with the demands of the firefighters. What happens?
So one of the things we've been looking at is that in 2011, Mike Roberson had a bill that would have would have changed the way the binding arbitration process works. That if the bargaining unit and the governing body didn't agree, then the last best offer of the governing body would be imposed unilaterally for the period of 1 year, and then they can come back and negotiate again. So there would be no arbitration process, and I think that may be a part of the solution. I don't know that that's actually been reintroduced, but it probably will.
So the bottom line now, what happens when they don't come to agreement is an unelected official, unelected people decide what the benefits are and spend the money of the city taxpayer, right?
Yeah, and in fact, most of the arbitrators, because there's kind of a shortage of arbitrators in Nevada, most of them come from California now. So they're not even residents of the state.
We want to thank everybody for coming. We want to thank everybody for coming. We've had a great speaker. Now we invite you to stay if you want to network, if you want to ask Jeffrey more questions. Don't forget, next month, very controversial, his boss will be here. And Dan Schwartz, if the governor allows it. And the governor will be here, Thank you, Jeffrey.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Like I said, you're welcome to stay, ask questions, network, whatever.
One last thing, just to remember, the mics are on for about 5 minutes live afterwards, so it's typical.
Oh, emphasize it again. By the way, you are welcome to talk, but the mics stay on for about 5 minutes on the broadcast. Last time we had a little bit of a privacy concern. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, no, that's great.
But they will stand you up and make you talk every time you say, oh, they slap you or something. I don't know. Stop. It stops you from
Yes, Jeffrey, I second that. Yeah. Toastmasters really, it's worth its weight in gold. I would really encourage you. Yeah, and you know the issue is not contractual law in Marbury versus Madison, which is a much hackneyed case that's been discussed and rediscussed ad infinitum. The issue is the collective bargaining side of it.